So two quick comments before I turn it over to the panel. One about each of the presentations. Thinking about predictions, I couldn't help but being sitting in the back of the room and remembering that a few of those very early courses that we did, not quite 50 years ago, but a little bit sooner than that, about the time that computers really started coming on. And we didn't know a lot about computers, but, still don't. But whenever we started talking about probabilities, inevitably one of us would stand up at some point in the room and say, and just remember, sooner or later, there's going to be a computer that, you plug in all the data, wait, the computer's going to crunch it all, and then all of a sudden up on the screen, it's going to pop and it says, little Johnny is in such and such a place, go get him. Listening to the first presentation, I think we're almost there. So that was really quite interesting to think about. About the second one, and you saw this on Allie's slide, in the last month, I have seen two articles that talk about the fact that climate change is increasing the both intensity and frequency of disasters. Fires, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes. I guess, at least I haven't seen any evidence that climate change is impacting earthquakes yet. I don't know if it is or not. And I don't know about whether it is really yet about people who get lost, but certainly a lot of the other stuff that, typical SAR people get involved in, there's going to be more of them. They're going to be more intense. And so, thinking about what to do about that is, I think, one of the things that most of you are probably involved in. So what we want to do is make, again, about a 5-minute comment, split between each of the two presentations, and then we'll go to each of them, and then we'll have the presenters react again to those, sort of like we did this morning, and then have some back and forth for about an hour. So we'll go that direction. So, Tony, how about we start with you this time? You don't have a choice.
There was a little bit of voting up here over who was going to go last and not provide too much comment. I understood a good part of the first one. That was all good. And it did make me think, and I'm actually going to link the two presentations together. As Ali alluded to, in 2011, the Christchurch earthquake response, ironically, as a country, we had better tools for recording everything that was going on, particularly the front end. I think you call it the front end of that product. So the taskings and all the search measurement stuff. Because as Ali said, as the volunteer, we're a volunteer organization, NGO, took a little bit of while for us to get involved in the response, which is fine. There were other priorities as part of that. But once we kicked off and were cut loose, we maxed out at 350 volunteers responding, and that contributed to searching and accounting for, across 58,000 residential properties in 5 days. That was the kind of effort to kind of put into that. And it was entirely just the volunteer body that did that work, which is great, actually, from our perspective, because typically we're only tasked by New Zealand Police. And we're really lucky in New Zealand because I don't have to deal with the jurisdictional BS that you do here. We have one police force who provide the tasking. So no municipal, county, state, or federal. It's one force, deploys anywhere, and likewise for us as the volunteers, one force. The issue being, as Ali highlighted, that we're the NGO, we kind of work for them, and they need to kind of task us and cut us loose. And we don't yet have an agreement with NEMA. It was being worked on prior to Gabrielle. But the point of the story is we were recording all the search effort, and we finished that quite a number of days ahead of expectation. and were retasked to go and support the police with the missing persons cases. And at that stage, there was still around about 10,000 people reported and recorded as missing. So we got invited in to use our expertise to go and record every undisturbed rubble pile in the city. That's cool. It's most of the city. But any pile that hadn't yet been searched, hadn't yet been disturbed for bodies. And they said, oh, we can give you a week. And we were like, well, we won't need a week. And he says, how fast can you do it? And I said, we're pretty sure we can do it in the weekend, 2 days. 2 days. I said, how? And he said, because we actually have a database. I said, we've just finished half the city. And we could quickly run the search query, pull out those, and there were 16 instances in that file, give them that file, and the rest of the half of the city was done in 6 hours. And that was really the value of having the ability to record stuff electronically and search it, and products that dealt with some of that association charts. Other than that, I really do think there is a place in the future for AI modeling, particularly, and it kind of ties into this morning's conversations. Most of us, and I'm going to lump myself in this because it's nice to feel young sometimes, but us older people who are kind of moving on, certainly in New Zealand and I believe around the world, attracting new volunteers into search and rescue is a challenge that we all face. And if we don't embrace the technology, it becomes harder. So how do we sort of get the best of those models, the best of both worlds in that, and how do we instill confidence in younger people to get involved in search and search management, as well as kind of have the meta-knowledge that the Bills and Skips and Chris and Rick and everybody else has, and we capture that. A couple of interesting facts from some of those events. I was just telling these gentlemen, Cyclone Gabrielle hit in Hawke's Bay. It was forecast to be a 1 in 50 year event. It peaked, and Ali will correct me here, between about 4 a.m. and 6 a.m., so it's still dark. The volume of water that did fall was 50 Olympic-sized swimming pools falling every minute for an hour. It ended up being a 1 in 1,000 year event in terms of that volume of water, to the point that water was rising so fast, people were scrambling out of beds, climbing onto kitchen counters, punching holes through their ceilings to crawl into their roof space, punching holes out their roof to kind of get onto their roof. And within 25 minutes of that rain starting, most houses were buried to their eaves. That's that kind of volume of response. That was kind of, it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming for any agency to kind of deal with that. Luckily at the time, we were working through a multi-agency agreement around flood response. Involved all the key players and adapting kind of the UK model, the DEVRA model for flood response. Unfortunately, that's been parked since. That event came 6 weeks after Cyclone Hale, which wasn't registered on there, but resulted in 2 people dying. One, which I'll just refer to him as an idiot, he went out kayaking in the floodwaters and got sucked down a drain hole. That was a volunteer SAR recovery, and there was a second person, an older person who got washed away as well, which was also a volunteer SAR recovery in that event. So yeah, but pretty much say in New Zealand, we've been in response mode since about 2010, September 2010, which was our first earthquake, and we haven't stopped. That has a massive impact on building those relationships.
Bryan?
So, like you guys so aptly put, you know, that AI, it's this big black box that eats data, right? So it goes right back to what I was talking about earlier. We need to make sure that data is getting places, because without that good data and probably a consistent way of sending that data in, it's going to make it harder for that machine learning to learn from us. So we still need that system to be able to put all this all in one place, and then to take the data out and not just have one more tool built, because, you know, Bob's got a tool, and Sartopo is a tool, and Esri has a whole series of tools, and you guys are building a tool, and states are building their own tools. Well, they're not talking to one another. So when I get that multi-state incident where now it affects my state and the neighboring state, we're on 2 different tools. We can't share that information, right? Our disaster doesn't have boundaries. Our maps do. So we need to get ourselves away from that idea of, well, my data stops at this line that we drew doesn't mean anything because the whole tri-state area may be affected. And we need to have a map that covers all of that. So that data needs to cover all of that. And my information of what we're doing, where my resources are, need to cover all of that. So, you know, again, goes right back to that, you know, garbage in, right? It's going to be garbage out. And if we can't take that garbage and put it into something that's a common operations picture that everybody understands with a quick look and know where the resources are and where the problems are and where to apply those resources. And then, you know, listening to the second brief, it all goes back to what FEMA's been asking us to do forever. Everybody took ICS 100, right? That's the class that you hit the space bar through, right? But it said resource typing, right? And how many of you have typed your resource according to NIMS? You don't have to raise your hand because there's not a lot of you out there probably. I've got 197 typed resources in my state up on a resource dashboard that I know where they are, what their capabilities are. And I don't have that problem of where, hey, we've got a flooding event here. Well, I'm not going to send a team that's not a flood rescue team out to respond to that area, right? I have the whole list of where my flood resources are. Those are the ones that are going to be used. They're typed, they're credentialed by their local agency saying that they are a validated swiftwater rescue team. So during Ida, we had a team that, you know, they wanted to help, right? They wanted to do the right thing. And we had a big flooding event going on. So we said, yeah, do you have this resource? Yep, we can send them. They get up there and they're Baywatch. They're not a floodwater rescue team, but, and they're looking at this event going, well, we don't have the capability to do that. So now they can't help there, right? So getting your resources typed and getting that inventory someplace is powerful. And, you know, I was just speaking with Allie on over the break. LANSAR, if you look at the NIMS resource typing for LANSAR, it breaks it up into two categories, disaster and lost person, right? The equipment for disaster LANSAR is very similar to your lost person data, your lost person search equipment. So, you know, we put together in our state a crossover training for all of that we're trying to deliver to a lot of our LANSAR, our lost person SAR teams, so they can do that disaster wide area search and then support that, that type of response. I know a lot of you have probably taken the TEACS wide area search class. You know, they teach that class, but then at the end of it, all these people kind of go to their agencies. There's never a capability built for wide area search. And what are we using to do wide area search? The urban search and rescue teams, which were really put together for what? A building that fell down, right? So now we're using this type 1 USAR team, 19 trucks, you know, millions of dollars worth of equipment to go door to door to do that wide area search, which every LANSAR team in here could be doing with a little bit of crossover training. So, you know, look into that. You'd be more than willing to share that, that program with you if you're interested in it. But that resource typing, especially when we're starting to look at these climate change type disasters and all these other things that are happening, you know, never in a million years did I ever think I'd respond to COVID, let alone now they're asking me to go out and help map a fire, or now, you know, numerous, you know, flooding events, an earthquake, of course, while I was on vacation, which was great. But, you know, an earthquake in the city. So we're going to see, you know, the complexity of these events and the challenges we face just keep rising, right? They're going to be calling for us. So building out those resources and making sure that everybody knows where those resources are, what those capabilities are. I think that's the most important planning thing that we can be doing right now.
Aaron?
You know, following on what Bryan said, you know, I think search and rescue, at least in Coconino County, has kind of evolved into more of an all-hazard response. Whenever there's a problem that nobody else knows how to deal with, it falls into the search and rescue's lap because we can mobilize quickly. We have trained resources. They're cheap, which is a problem. Is I think that you know, listen to Allie's presentation, that you know, volunteers they're not free, and it takes investment and it takes care.
Yes,
You know, one
I
of the things that
didn't
I'm
dinner because you
kind of
fixed my
struggling with our in our state and our county is we're asking these people to do a pretty highly technical job in a dangerous situation, and the workers' compensation that's outlined by the state is if somebody gets hurt as a volunteer on a search and rescue mission and can't go to their normal job, they're entitled to $400 a month. That is the volunteer worth per month. So when I'm asking one of our volunteers to do a hoist rescue in some really technical, an avalanche condition, there's it's a pretty big burden, and there's a lot of guilt. Like if something bad happens, we're going to reward you with $400 a month, which is not enough to buy groceries for a week in Flagstaff. So those are things that need to be addressed at our level. I don't know how it shakes out in other parts of the state. But Arizona's done a lot of work to include dispatchers in required that we have to provide mental health screenings and support for dispatchers in addition to firefighters and police officers. Haven't included search and rescue, and we're dealing with our volunteers are dealing with traumatic incidents just like those people are. So there's a lot of work to be done to recognize the value of a volunteer workforce. In terms of the climate related stuff, we're seeing that in Coconino County for sure. We've had these atmospheric rivers which are coming at a frequency that we have never really seen before, at least in my 30 years with the team, and it's delivering. We're getting snowfall, storms that deliver 4, 5, 6 feet of snow over the course of a couple of days. And if you think about Arizona, nobody thinks about snow and avalanche, but we're dealing with that, and then that's usually followed by rapid warming, rain on snow, and flooding in places we've never seen flooding before. And what's happening is people are living in a lot of people want to live in a really remote or kind of off-grid communities because they don't really want to deal with the government until they need the help from the government. And they're not prepared for these situations at all. They don't plan ahead. They don't have firewood. They don't have propane. They don't have food. And then it becomes a search rescue problem to go take care of these people. So that's taking a toll on our resources for things that probably could be managed with a little bit of prevention. The AI presentation, I'm glad there are smart people out there like you guys, because I'm like, I don't totally get it. I listened to a couple of TED Talks about AI on the drive over here from Flagstaff yesterday, trying to understand a little bit more about what's going on there. I don't even know what a large language model means, that's, but there's a lot of really cool things happening, and as an aging out search and rescue professional, I guess, there are things I was scared of, like, oh, GPS is going to take away the search. There's not going to be any more fun searches anymore. But as we've seen, technology doesn't solve all the problems, or it allows people to get into bigger problems, probably. But I'm excited to see what the AI can do. And kind of like Bryan was saying, I think the critical thing for me about these things is the ability to get the information from one system to another system, like through APIs or something like that. So, we're using SAR Topo and TAC and a variety of different things. We just got to make things talk to each other so that we can share the data efficiently, and what formats need to be we need to be sharing data in. I think that's the thing that I struggle with, but my partner at our unit is much smarter than me and tells me, these are the things you need to do. But yeah, excited to see what's happening in that realm for sure.
And Paul.
Okay. I'm going to start with the New Zealand presentation. First of all, I'm going to look at this at a higher level than I think, because that's really the only place I can really think about this and provide some, what I hope will be some positive feedback. Yes, climate change occurs everywhere. So we can worry about greenhouse gases and carbon emissions and all of that. But I think the real issue you have is the use of what I assume are all volunteer resources. Are they under one complete umbrella? All the teams under one umbrella and one organizational name? 4, okay. Well, that just helped. So I'm trying to figure out how best can you be identified. You have an identification issue. You have a standards issue. You have a recognition issue. You have an ownership issue. And part of that comes from the fact that I don't think that they've been tied to, or maybe they haven't been tied to a specific threat or hazard within the community. But people think, oh, they can do all of it. And some people could think, oh, they only do search. So there's this misnomer of what they do. So every year for many years, I did it for the state of Nevada for 13 years, call it a threat and hazard identification risk assessment. Similar thing. Out of that is born the identity of what are the risks that we really have to face. And I saw your graph, and there, no doubt water is a little bit of a problem for you. So you have to figure out how these teams identify to that threat and hazard. Make them a part of a solution for that. Now, does that mean it's going to change their construct or their identity or whatever? I don't know. Maybe it's just going to improve a capability that they want to have or need to have or whatever. But they have to have some kind of identity to these threats or hazards. Otherwise, it's just nebulous. They do something and they don't do anything. And so they need some identity. Out of that comes a resource identification. So take a look at what does that resource really do? I mean, what they say they can do, like a search team, what they say they can do is not necessarily what they can do. So that has got, the ground truth has got to come out of what they can really do. So they all know whether they hate it or love it, they need to figure that out. What do we do? Do we need to improve? Do we need to change our direction? And somehow out of a white paper on your threats and hazards, the report that comes from that, and how the country is going to address those issues, there are other resources, but could they be included in that list of resources to address those issues? And how are you going to get them to move to that direction? Help government understand what they can do, okay? And out of that, they also have to come to their own reality that we're not everything. We can't do everything. We want to be out there. They're loved by the public, but even the public doesn't really understand what they do, according to your presentation. So giving them some identity to not everything, but to something that's meaningful, that the government says, yes, we need people to do this, and we don't have that. Look for something that they can identify with and work toward that. And of course, we still fight with standards here. So I'm not suggesting that that's going to be solved tomorrow or next year or whatever. But Rick and I have talked long hours about competencies. What are their core competencies? A region along the coast may have different sub-competencies or other competencies, but they ought to all be trained under the same core competencies that everyone's going to need. From my daughter was in Pemberton. She ran a coffee shop for a year. So she went to New Zealand and she told me a little bit about it. From the North Island to the South Island, there's got to be some kind of commonality with what they do and how they do that. And if you can ground that, get them to that, then maybe the other ones can have some additional competencies that are included with where they're at, specific to where they are, not a mountainous region or a coastal region or whatever. I don't know. That's a tough fit, but out of the weather issue, there might be coming some things that they can tie to that might be meaningful to them and give them some identity to what they are. I don't know if that means anything to you or not, or what. That's what came to my mind when I thought about that, because I'm not a climate person. Well, the weather changes, I adapt or overcome, and we try to get through that. My friends with AI and Chris, who I've known forever. First of all, I applaud you for going down this road. It's uncharted territory. It's got a lot of holes. It's got a lot of diversions. There's a lot of complex issues that have to be addressed in this. I've talked to a small group of your folks here. Here's the things I came out of that. One, this is a diamond in the rough, but it is like a rock still in the ground. You have to cultivate that. It's going to have to be cut and polished. You're going to have to know what you're going to do with this thing. To have it just to have it doesn't mean anything. If it can't be used by the people who need it in the field, it's worth nothing. It has value that can't be claimed. So I was talking about, the guy in Arkansas who's running a search, first one in the last 20 years or so, and he's responsible for finding a missing kid. And how does this address that issue? It may not. He may just continue on and have to do what he has to do, and AI is never going to touch it or look at it or whatever. I thought, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I think this needs to live not with everybody, but with a certain group of people, a certain organization, a certain agency, or a certain entity that can manage and control. I don't want you to get the idea that they are doing the work for you, but because of the complexity of this, it needs to be, well, how many of you know what a fusion center is? A law enforcement fusion center. Every state has one. Some have several. And a fusion center takes information from a wide variety of sources, validates it, makes it into actionable intelligence, and distributes it to its community so that that community can work the issue without having to go through all that processing process. And they're trusted and they're verifiable. They're certified agencies. And I see one of the dreams I always had was that somehow a search fusion center should occur or be contained somewhere that they can call somebody and go, I have a problem. This is going on right now and I need a solution in 2 hours. What can you do? And I don't see AI doing that tomorrow. It ain't happening. It's like Kessler's book. It's still on the back burner under. And I love Bob. I told you all about that. I won't talk about the affair, but I'm going to tell you that you are onto something. I don't want to know how sausage is made. The slides, TMI. They really are. I want to see the output. I want to see the outcome because I have other things to worry about. That's what these guys are here for. That's where they're getting an education. Professor, that's what your job is, and you are doing a great job. You inspiring them to move beyond what is the normal AI, correct my spelling and my word and make me sound good. No, I want something that's usable, that's going to save somebody's life. And if you can do that, and you can make it quick, and you can make it verifiable and put in good data, reproducible, and that's only going to happen if you have people who are consistently using the system and know how to do that. Because I think the guy in Arkansas, God bless him, but I think the guy in Arkansas isn't going to know how to figure out how to input this stuff. It just ain't happening. It's just not going to happen that way. So I think it needs to lay with a center or a group of people or individuals who understand the system, provide that at no cost to the local jurisdiction, and are able to help them get beyond that and give them the answer they need. And so I'm not going to address AI any more than that. I just think you're onto something. I think it's great. You know how I feel about this, Chris, and you know that I think I think the group is going in the right direction. I think this is something that has real big potential, but it's not ready for prime time yet. It needs to be verified and reproduced with good quality data, get that machine learning going, get some cases under its belt, let it get comfortable with how it's thinking and processing, get that process going. And I think you are going to, I don't know if you guys are going to go on to something, make video games or whatever you're going to do, but somebody's got to do that too. And I'm not trying to diminish what you do. It is way beyond me, and I'm glad that somebody's doing that. But let me tell you something. I think you are, I think, Bill, we're not going to have somebody poke stuff in a computer and tell us where Johnny is. That's not going to happen. But if you can process the critical information faster for us and keep it consistent and make it valuable to people, then you're going to be able to help them.
Go ahead, Brian.
Making it harder on me here. I think the way that you're going down with it, using the common term, the common forms that we're using, that's fantastic because that makes that easy for that whoever, as long as they have SAR experience, they know how to use the lost person questionnaire. They know how to fill out those forms. So that helps with that, making the data, that common data set, right? Because it's a form that we're used to using. So yeah, the more that continues, it just makes it easier for us to get that data standardization that we're looking for.
One last thing, common operating picture. You can't lose that because there are a lot of folks who are going to know this system. And if they also know, I'm I was a NIMS, the NIMS guy for the state for 13 years. I'm a NIMS whore, so I'll just tell you that right now. But if you can make, keep a common operating picture with folks, even if you're using AI, your work assignments, your 204s, that needs to be pretty consistent or have a more consistent look. I'm not saying that just because I'm NIMS compliant. I'm saying that because there's a lot of folks who are going, when you ask them about those forms, they have a picture in their mind right now. I know what it is. The 211, the check-in thing here. Maybe you need to change that around a little bit. I don't know. That's the fine tuning that you're going to do. But right now, you're in the polish and cutting phase. And I think you're well onto something.
Ali, do you have any reaction or comment to anything that anybody said in this group?
I think Tony can probably answer some of those questions. I'll leave the training, the topics that you talked about around training to Tony, because he's done a lot of work in that space leading up to this point. But yeah, totally agree. One of the things I hope to do as part of the PhD is actually talk to SAR groups and individuals on where they feel they fit, because a lot of individuals within SAR groups have these great ideas of what we could be doing, whether that's the reality within their scope, within their abilities, within their training, and also whether that's actually a need within the emergency management sector as well. So talking to them from an individual level as well, from a group level, and then also talking to the NGOs, the four main umbrellas, and their operation arms and governance, and just finding out what their mandates are. Because having the likes of land search and rescue being involved in swift water rescue may not be appropriate. However, having surf life saving develop swift water rescue teams may be very appropriate. So it really depends on the context. And like you said, you know, the North Island of New Zealand is very, very different to the South Island of New Zealand, but there are competencies and standards which are required throughout. And I think that's something that Tony can talk to a little bit more. Again, yeah, perspectives, the what, the capability, the how, those competencies, and then just the reality in general. But most importantly, actually, what's the need? And where can that need be filled from a professional capacity? Because at the end of the day, if there is a need in the community and government isn't actually doing what needs to be done, the volunteer groups will organically head toward those areas, and they need to be supported in that. So then what can we do to actually support them in that area? Tony, do you want to talk about training?
Okay, thank you. Chris, you or any of
Ali's been known to fib. And I think Paul made some good comments. So some of those things that Ali was just saying, you know, core competencies are standardized across the country. We just did a major rewrite of that a few years ago. Our core issue that I see it is it's not the willingness of our volunteers to respond, because they are dead keen, and it is wide area search. We certainly see that kind of more rural outreach, while we do have fire service and USAR teams that will deal with collapsed buildings and all that other stuff. The core issue hitting the volunteers is probably twofold. One is we've got jurisdictional bun fight between the lead agencies, and essentially everybody going, not me, and a lack of willingness to take charge. That's a core issue, because, you know, I have 3,500 volunteers who every single one of them would have dropped what they were doing and responded to Hawke's Bay. There are issues in those types of disasters around getting people in, because there was very limited access to get resource in. There was very limited access to support them logistically on the ground. and there wasn't a lot of tasking to do. I mean, it was devastating, but the large part of the devastation was done and dusted in 6 hours. You know, I spoke before, you know, it was up to the eaves within 30 minutes. It was below your knee level and standing water 6 hours later. So there's that kind of, that issue. So most resource didn't get on the ground. So there was kind of that. But the big one that's kind of striking us at the moment is, as an NGO, is looking after the health, safety, and well-being of our volunteers. So some of that floodwater, and I deal with this, I'm a volunteer firey as well, because that's what people do. Do everything. In some of that floodwater response, so we have one person still missing from that event, and ironically, there's a search going on today to try and hopefully recover that person. But where that was, the police dive squad came in to dive on some what were believed to be vehicles still underwater. They tested the water. It was 400 times the safe limit that they were going to dive on. And so they just went, nah. And I was kind of like, well, you know, every other agency had volunteers in that water knee deep for 3 days prior to that without the appropriate PPE. So we've kind of put a bit of a pause on that flood response, that wide area response and floodwaters, until we can ensure the safety of our volunteers. And that's that impermeable barrier and as part of that. So yeah, I totally endorse your comments.
Chris, do you have any reaction to anything that came out of the panel, or any of your team?
That's on. Yeah, so Chris just did his job. He handed me the microphone. Yeah, I'll head it to Dr. Krapes. Yeah, so the reaction, you know, I have a mixed reaction to what was said. You know, when we talk about common operating models, all these different agencies and all these different groups that do all kinds of different disaster planning don't share a common operating model. And I have personally kind of a benefit of seeing it from multiple dimensions. I'm the president of a fire district board, so I work in the fire service. I ran one of the FEMA task force in California, Task Force 3. I've been on that team for up until a month ago for 14 years. And then I'm a SAR volunteer. So I'm kind of this weird unicorn that sees it from all different lenses. And ultimately, to the presentation from the folks from New Zealand, it all comes back to relationships. And that's when we put those things to work together. As it relates to the AI project, I would probably tell you I kind of violently agree with a lot of what you said. We don't expect in a presentation like this that everybody's going to understand the technology. Part of our hope here is that there's 5 or 10% of the people that do and might be associated with somebody that can do exactly what you said and make this a platform that's available and can be used around, you know, around the world, hopefully, eventually. The start of this project, and I mentioned it in the presentation, we went pretty fast because we had a lot of material, the art of what's possible. So when we embarked on this project, you know, the hope is we can build a platform, we can put the platform into work, and it can at least solve the problem for any of the teams that are using today a combination of the base ARC, you know, form-based system, which was mentioned. I think that's the right perspective, combined with taking advantage of some of the data that's already there, Bob Kester's data that we all rely on. And, you know, as a search manager, you know, his flip charts, his book, his data, and we think there's even more value in that data that can be mined out of that data and put into real time. So in a way, we've accomplished the goal, which was the art of what's possible, which is listening to all of you on the panel. It's kind of saying, hey, this sounds like it's possible. And I think we've kind of proven that it is possible. It has a long ways to go. And then, you know, and so I look at it from kind of a theoretical, big world picture. Can I solve world hunger? Yeah, I'd love to be able to solve the situation in Arkansas, you know, where there's a missing child somewhere. I've been involved over the telephone with searches up in Oregon. One of my employees' mother was missing when disappeared. I was the CEO of the company, and I started working with a sergeant up at the sheriff's office in Bend, Oregon at 2 in the morning, helping him plan a search. So I do have that big picture view of kind of hoping this can, kind of solve world hunger and can do all those things. But I also have a practical view that says just automating the search management process can dramatically increase and improve the efficiency of SAR teams today. We live in a world in a mound of paper, and we're 20 years behind technology in taking that paper and saying, hey, we can use technology to do that. We can build a platform to do that. And so for me, I want to make sure that we take the practical away from it, which is we can automate the search management process. And then we can add the dream on top of it that all this new modern AI technology can actually help us start predicting where to find missing people. And I think through the work that these students have done, we've kind of proven that it can do that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to get into the nuts and bolts. We're actually going to do the same presentation at the main conference, on Wednesday afternoon. We have a little bit more time, so we can talk a little bit more about this as well. For a point of clarity, we keep referring to the BASARC forms, Bay Area Search and Rescue Council, was forms that were developed back in the 90s by the Bay Area Search and Rescue teams. So for just as an example, a search and rescue SAR 104 form, which is a SAR assignment form that was developed by us. And so that's just that we took all those forms, the ICS 200 forms, and that's all, that's how we put that together. Again, that was for clarity purposes. Paul, yeah, you're right. We've known each other for years, and we know a lot of how each other thinks. And there's a need to do what we're doing, and I think it's, we have the capability of doing it now, or again, proof of concept, which is what we were trying to do. And so, yeah, it's getting the support, and just from what I've heard around the room and what the panel up front says is, yeah, we can put some legs on this thing and see how far we can run with it. So I think I'm appreciative of your comments, all your comments there too. Professor, you have anything? Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I admittedly have a very narrow perspective. Before my involvement in this project, I've never been involved in search and rescue. I knew about it, of course, but fortunately, I never managed to get lost badly enough to have to be found, and I never participated in any activities. But I would like to point out another aspect, and that is the involvement of the students, because from their perspective, this is an excellent opportunity to learn about an exciting technology that they have very good prospects in, and they also can utilize it for a good purpose. As you mentioned, they could also use AI to develop video games or to mine Bitcoins in a slightly more efficient manner, or to do something else that is nice and entertaining and good for their career. But I really appreciate that they do it for a good purpose.
Amen.
We have a question online came in about how do you allow access to all of the search and rescue teams to fill in electronic documents while ensuring the integrity of the documents and the search, the opportunity for deleting, filling in the wrong fields seems huge.
Yeah, Chris just commented, maybe I shouldn't share it. You can't fix stupid. But yeah, the reality is that, yeah, that's an aspect of building what I consider kind of going from a proof of concept and a prototype to a production system, is the technology has the capability to have security rules. We're already doing data validation. So we're already making sure that you can't put a time into a date field. You in a free text place where we're looking for a name, we can do a reasonable amount of validation to say, hey, is that a name or is that not a name, as an example. So basic data validation is a pretty common thing in a database-oriented application, but the security rules are definitely there. Right now, we have it kind of set up as, and everybody can see everything. And the reality is, even in a single search, for those of you that run large-scale searches, you don't necessarily want every searcher seeing every piece of data. because you'll have your searcher self-assigning to where they think they should go look, and they won't be looking where you've asked them to go look. And that's all handled by security rules. And we haven't implemented a lot of them. We've done the basics on some of them, but that's just part of making it a production product.
Any questions from the audience? Any more reaction from the panel?
I've started reading a book called Normal Accidents. Have you heard about that? And one of the aspects is like tight coupling of technology. And do you think there's any danger of, I guess maybe getting to the point of some laziness if like all I have to do is plug this in and it's going to tell me what to do and eliminate some critical thinking in the future? Or do we have enough protection that if this doesn't work out or it's not working that day, that we can fall back on an analog system?
Questions? For response?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. You can never really plan the technology at the end of the day is going to replace the human. I think this is one of the kind of misguided thoughts of AI. This idea that suddenly we don't need workers, we don't need employees at a company because AI is going to do the job. And the AI models, the reality is they're not that dependable yet, even the biggest and best of them. If you go on to ChatGPT or Google Gemini, two readily available engines, go put in your health condition and see what it does. Because what it does is it doesn't give you any information. It says you should go see your doctor. And so there's a reason for that, is because the owners of those engines don't want to be responsible for the outcome, because the AI engine by itself cannot diagnose and solve your medical problem. And it still requires a medical professional. Now, can you go to the web and get educated about your condition? And can you walk in armed with information when you go to your provider? Yes, but the human brain is still required and all that. So I'm not quite as worried as what you suggested, because I think ultimately we'll have analog systems, we'll have a fallback to the old way of doing things. And that's been the case through most of the technology innovation over the last 40 or 50 years. If you look at what forensic accountants do when they walk in, they don't rely just on the computer records. They go get all the paper that created the computer records and they look at those. And then they say, okay, well, the system may not be the real copy of what really happened. That may be the fraudulent view of what happened. So instead, I'll go down and look at the documents. Same thing happens in criminal trials all day long. It ultimately becomes, all the system data, all the knowledge they got out of systems compared to the one email that actually tells you what went on. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I think it boils down to confirm and verify. I think that's what everybody's kind of concerned about, that we're just going to take what the machine says for granted. The one thing that comes to mind for me is that this is going to happen in as close to real time as we can, and it'll pop right up. And we'll be able to look at that and say, that doesn't make sense, based on our own knowledge and experiences and things like that. Currently what happens is somebody does a debrief, fills out a debriefing form. They say, well, we went here, but we couldn't go here. So there's a hole in where they went. That doesn't get picked up for hours, days, years, whatever sometimes. And that could have been the tipping point, to solving the missing person incident. So if it pops up or it gets analyzed and say, okay, here's a hole over here that didn't get covered, okay, that will be raised to the top right away and say, and it's not going to say, thou shalt go do that. It's just going to point it out saying, okay, something's wrong here. Maybe we should be taking a look at this. Does that make sense? So that's the goal. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
Just one last comment, and then I'll let you go. Yeah, Yeah, just one last requirement or comment, I guess, is that I think you have to look at it from the lens of this technology is not going to solve world hunger, but technology can make you a lot smarter at what you're doing. And that's probably the most productive way to think about it. If you're a search manager, technology is not going to take away your job, but technology can make you a lot smarter and you can get much faster results. And there's, and if that's what we can get from all this, that's a really incredible outcome, because it just goes back to finding the person faster. And we all know it's an emergency. We all know time is not our friend. And so if we can find them faster and we can make the search manager and the people that are running searches smarter through technology, we'll have accomplished the goal.
So I think it's great, even if this tool does nothing. Okay. Even if this tool does nothing but add one more person in a consensus, I think it's a powerful tool. But now it's becoming like another model. We've got the statistical, theoretical. Now we've got this AI model that we can lay on top of it. It's going to help us make decisions quicker. And the fact that if we can now plug that in with, hey, here's the search effort that's going on. Now that machine just learned something new that, well, nothing was done there, but now something was done there. And now how does that shift everything around? That's going to help us make those decisions quicker. So I commend you all. This is phenomenal work, and keep it up, because anything you can do to help us find that person quicker is a phenomenal tool. So outstanding work.
Good. Well, I would like to add one more thank you to the panel and to the presenters, Ali and Chris and your group. I think there were two really interesting presentations and some great comments and so forth. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Amy for the next session.